like to introduce our next guest, and she is not only a dynamo packed into a little Asian body, she's also a very good friend. She is who I go to whenever I have any sort of questions about laws or the legislature or how things run, referendums, anything in Olympia. She's the first person I call. She is so full of knowledge, and she's been doing this for a very long time. She is the director of My Family, My Choice, and so I'm going to introduce my very good friend, Sharon Hanek.
Is this on? Okay. First of all, I want to start by saying that Jennifer introduced me wrong. She called me an Asian woman, but I want you all to know I identify today as a 6-foot-tall Norwegian male. And I want all of you to look up to me. And if any one of you looks down at me at lunchtime, because I actually am under 5 feet, you know, I'm going to sue you, and I just might win. That's the world that we live in today. And then you wonder why the suicide rates are going up. Because what we're doing is we're creating a child in this bubble called public school system that has no anchor in anything truth. They have no pride in accomplishing something like, I know my times tables. Because times tables and flashcards are no longer allowed in many school systems. So the idea of having the correct answer is no longer honored. So you have an 8-year-old child, actually this happened in Sumner School District, that comes home and says, Mommy, he's crying. He says, we voted on our answer today, and I had the correct answer, but they voted on the other kid's answer. And so he got his first bad grade in the classroom because it was a group grade. And she said, oh, you're wonderful, you're great, you're so smart. And then she sent him back to school, and it happened again. That 8-year-old child is now about 18 years old. And I wondered, over these past 10 years since I talked to the mother, what does that child think when he knows he's got the correct answer, but he also has been told so many times, your correct answer doesn't matter. And then we wonder why children don't have confidence in who they are, and now they're going to lose confidence in who they are as a gender. That's what we're doing, and when I use the words destroying, I mean destroying. Later on, they had a new definition of sex orientation. That was in the year 2006. And then in 2007 was the first sex ed law. And the first sex ed law, the one that we just updated in 2020, basically said you will teach sex ed. Well, actually it says if you teach sex ed, you have to do it a certain way. And that was policy that was put down into the school system. That one was policy 2125. And every school district pretty much adopted it. Some may not have, but any school district that adopted it was trapped into teaching comprehensive sex ed. They were trapped into teaching that abstinence is illegal to do. The modern, by the way, that year, 2007, was also the year that many abstinence educators went out of business. There used to be a bunch of groups. There used to be an abstinence educators organization. They're all gone now. That was policy 2025. In 2009, there was a domestic partnership law. They said, oh, we don't need gay marriage. We just want to have domestic partnerships so we can have agreements. So our leaders said, fine, give it to them so they won't go after gay marriage. couple of years later, they did go after gay marriage. And so in 2012, we passed our gay marriage laws. All of these were into referendums, these 3 laws, and they all failed. The Supreme Court in 2015 allowed gay marriage nationally. And when they did that, it was as if that was a green light to go forward on the whole next step, which we now know as transgender movement. And that's soon after that was when we started seeing those laws on locker room bathrooms, being able to go to any bathroom you want. That happened. That's the sequence of events. I believe that the sequence of events which pushed the gay marriage laws into place is what started the sequence of events for gender. Then we have the WASTA policy, what we taught, 3211. It was interesting to me because there is a difference between HIV education, sex ed education, and what it's called the bully law. And a lot of folks like the bully law because, gee, Christians were being bullied, so we may as well pass this law. In Tahoma School District, I was talking to some parents that were passing the first versions of 3211, and it was called the bully law, B-U-L-L-Y. Today, as in Moses Lake, Paul Hill is dealing with this law. They have renamed it. Policy 3211 is known as the Transgender Law. They're finally calling it what it really is. But when they sold it to us, they sold it to us as a bully law. Every daycare provider must have equity training. Daycare providers do not distinguish between private daycare or religious daycares, which means your Catholic daycare, your Lutheran daycare is supposed to be offering equity books like the Anti-Racist Baby into the classrooms. That is a requirement now. And I don't know how they're going to expand that, but I'm sure that they will within that because they have full control over your daycare center, even if you are a church daycare center. So when you change the law on what education is, when you allow all these other things to now take over, it's called pedagogy, methodologies of teaching, that comes in where you don't have to have correct answers anymore. You don't have to, you focus more on how you feel than how much you learn. So we have more mindfulness, more yoga, more tolerance, more dismantling racism. That's up. What's gone is academics. No math, no science. We're seeing this all the time. No cursive writing, no grammar, no phonics. All of that is gone. And this is just evidence that we have policies in place that say that when you teach mathematics, and this has been going on since the year 2000, and this the WASL test that we all took, which morphed into the high school history, high school proficiency exam, which morphed into Common Core. All of that is based on a math program that does not require correct answers. In fact, there are 3 dysfunctional math beliefs. The goal of mathematics is to provide the correct answer. That is dysfunctional. That the nature of math is to recall and apply algorithmic procedures. That's problem solving, that's doing algorithms, computations. That's dysfunctional. That the nature of mathematical knowledge is that everything is either right or wrong with no allowance for gray area. That is dysfunctional. And we found this document in the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. This is in their manual on how to teach teachers to teach math. So what's going on with many laws is that there is an outcome-based concept that this is the law we want. We want everyone to feel gender equity. We want everyone to feel that, well, not everyone, let me phrase this. If you are white, you are supposed to feel that you are oppressors. And if you are BIPOC, indigenous, people of color, then you are the victims, unless you're people of color called Asian. And then we have become the new white. Because it's about victims and oppressors. It's about traditionally, if you actually read that, the actual CRT and equity is not about skin color. It is about historically oppressed individuals. And when you talk about historically oppressed individuals, usually you do think of the blacks, because they were enslaved. You ignore the fact that thousands of Japanese Americans got put in camp, including my mother. You ignore that. And then you say that it's going to be historically, their history, injustice people, and that also includes gays and transgender. So I predict that this whole equity thing is not really about your skin color. It is about your gender, more than it is your skin color. And it was interesting how moms would look at it horrified. And when their 4th grade child came over to ask for more money to get a hot dog, one mom sat on it so that their daughter would not see the curriculum. And then after she left, finished looking at it, and I thought, gee, that curriculum is in your daughter's classroom now. That is her curriculum for sex ed if you leave her in school. And it was Milton School District. So then share your information, and then you have to show up. You always hear showing up. Gee, I don't have time to go to the school board meeting. My family and my choice developed the one-click system and sent email blasts out to everyone so that we could pump up our numbers. I got tired of seeing that there was a bill on income tax, it was a taxation bill, and 14,000 people said they loved it, and 4,000 people said they didn't. And I thought, this has got to change. So I started networking with and using my family and my choice, teaching others how to do that, teaching others how to create the one-clicks and getting it out. So finally, towards the end of session, we started getting more numbers on our side than they had on theirs. We need to keep that going. So when you get an email that says, voice your opinion, react on it and share that email with others. That's showing up. And we need to approach it with prayer. I have talked to parents that said, I don't know if I can't take my kids out of school, that I don't have enough time to homeschool, I don't have enough money to private school. But I'd like to say this challenge. What if the problems in your school and the problems your children are having, either with their own identity or suicide problems, what if a lot of that is just made worse by going in this environment called the school system, where you have a Healthy Youth survey that they just passed a law 2 years ago that's going to add the adverse childhood experience questions. Those are trigger questions. So now we are putting trigger questions that psychologists use to assess a child into a survey that kids are taking. What if a child was triggered while taking the survey? Who's going to be there to help them? Who's going to know that they had this experience? I thought it was very dangerous. I did testify against combining this. Talk about stress and anxiety. Of course, an 8-year-old will get stressed and anxiety when they are being told that they are the wrong gender, they are the wrong color, and that their math answers don't matter, even though it was the correct answer. How can you establish confidence? How can you establish a personality in that children? They call it social-emotional learning, but it's not really about social-emotional, what the child needs. It's about the outcome of what the government wants your child to look like. That's the whole goal. I am now working on the initiatives. One of these is curriculum transparency. It means that we have the right the school must post what your child went through and put it on the internet so we can know what's going on in the classroom a little bit better. Sure, it would be nice to have more, but at least this takes away the question about, can I see what my child is doing? There is a process. We have checked through the process. The Attorney General cannot stop the process. This is veto proof. Our governor cannot stop the process. But the process will not continue unless every one of us in this room gets engaged, involved in gathering signatures.
We have these little things as speaker and questions. So there's panel discussion coming up, and we'd love to have your questions that we can gather, and if you have some ready here, we're ready to gather them today, and Jennifer talked a little bit about that.
So, okay, so like Mark said, if you have questions and you already have some of those little piece of papers, if you could just hold them up, and Keith will come and he'll pick them up. Otherwise, is the stack still out at, out at the registration table? We have a big stack of them. Go out there and grab a few, write your question for the speaker. We're going to take those and have our panel discussion at the end. So you can, for our first set of speakers, write that down during lunch.
Critical theory activists are on a mission to remove any feelings of abnormality among people who do not subscribe to the traditional norms of Western civilization. They are trying to set normal at a new temperature. That's what's happening right now. The virus has reached pandemic levels in K-12 schools, places of business, and government agencies. But be aware, no formal classes in critical theory are taught in these places. You don't have to teach a class called Critical Theory 101 to effectively spread the virus. The transmission is done through such positive-sounding topics as cultural competency, diversity, equity, inclusion, and social-emotional learning. Who could be against these things? You criticize them at your peril. That's the irony of it all. The first word in critical theory is critical, yet the criticism doesn't go both ways. Critical theory relentlessly and mercilessly criticizes those they say are oppressors. This makes it easy to cancel them. Every past white, European, or Christian sin is revisited and repeated again and again. They shame the oppressors, starting in elementary school. Caucasians, both young and old, who never thought they were racist before, are now thinking they are inherently racist because they cannot separate themselves from the system of so-called whiteness in which Christianity plays a central role. This is truly a deadly virus of the mind. This brings us to the most important question. Is there a cure for the virus? Yes, there is.
Different ways of thinking that I want to preface this presentation with. The first one looks like this. It's a paradigm of thought which has an upper and a lower level. There's a straight line between the two parts, the upper and the lower, and in this we have going to church and the upper level, morning devotions, Bible reading and prayer, taking a missions trip to Mexico, singing a worship song on Sunday morning, work with a pastor or a missionary, witnessing, etc., etc. Those are all in the upper story. Okay, in the lower level, you have working for Microsoft, Monday through Friday, or whatever, managing a bank, setting public policies at the city, state, or national levels, building a highway, running a business, etc., all in this other compartment down below. Now, this upper realm is personal. It's your personal life, okay? The lower realm is public. The upper realm is generally known as the sacred stuff of life, the sacred part of our lives. The lower realm is generally referred to as the secular part of our lives. There is a very thick and almost impenetrable line between the upper and the lower stories. In this way of thinking, Christianity is a private matter. It is not to be mixed with the public square. This way of thinking has a name, a hyphenated name, dualism. Dualism. Two ways of compartmentalizing life. I like to call it the sacred-secular divide. Now, there's another way of thinking. We'll contrast the two. In this way of thinking, you've got a circle, but you've got on the horizontal thick line, you have a vertical line that's straight running all the way down the center, okay? But this straight line cuts through the center of every endeavor known to humanity, from business of any kind to education, law, politics, sports, arts, labor, family, all the way down the list. And in this way of thinking, up at the top and at the bottom of this line, keeping that line straight, is the Bible. And Christ, the living Word. The living Word, the living Word. Okay, that is what keeps the line straight. Now, you can either if you're a business person, you can either perform a business in harmony with God's designs, in harmony with His will, or you can do that very same business in conflict with God's design. It doesn't matter if you're selling used cars, whatever it is. Selling used cars, according to this way of thinking, is not a secular job. Quote, from the earliest settlement of the immigrants, politics and religion, he means Christianity, contracted an alliance which has never been dissolved. 1831. I don't know whether all the Americans have sincere faith in their religion, for who can search the human heart, but I am certain that they hold it to be indispensable to the maintenance of Republican institutions. Wow, that's quite a statement. He says, this opinion is not peculiar to a class of citizens or to a party. It belongs to the whole nation. W-H-O-L-E. Every rank of society. This is a French historian noting that. Listen to this. He said, the Americans combine the notions of Christianity and of liberty so intimately in their minds that it's impossible to make them conceive of one without the other. Must necessarily impossible. What? This is Christos supremacy. That's what it is. We have gotten confused. We seem to think, as generally, that the separation of church and state is the same as the separation of Christianity and state. It is not. It never has been the same. The separation of church and state and the separation of Christianity and state are not the same, period. The Founding Fathers didn't want a church-run state, and they didn't want a state-run church. They didn't want either one. They were really clear on that. But they also viewed Christianity as essential for the proper functioning of both. The foundation of all free government and social order must be laid in families and in the discipline of youth, and any system of education, get this, which limits instruction to the arts and sciences and rejects the aids of religion, he was referring specifically to Christianity, in forming the character of its citizens, is essentially defective. And that first crack happened in 1837 in Massachusetts. Massachusetts formed the first state board of education, and the driver behind public education was Horace Mann. He envisioned so-called common schools provided by the state, being non-sectarian and free. You don't have to pay anything. Free. He envisioned religiously passive approach to education, and that's what we got. Of course, he wasn't the only one. In the 20th century, he really got nailed by the father of progressive education. Who was that? John Dewey, right. I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, but he said the time is past for belief in theism. He said we consider the religious forms and ideas of our fathers no longer adequate. And the rest is history. He taught at Columbia University in New York City, surprising surprise, that's also where the Frankfurt School came in 1935. And it transformed the American approach to education. By 1963, the foundation, which cracked in 1837, by 1963 was total dust. Total dust. It was gone. It's already been mentioned today. In 1963, holism was completely gone by that time. And taking the Bible out in 1963 was not a gigantic shock, because it basically wasn't functional. But it was formalized in 1963 by the Supreme Court to remove all devotional readings of the Bible from the public schools. Critical race theory, comprehensive sex ed, diversity, inclusion, I call it diversity, inclusion, equity, because it's DIE, which I think is better than DEI. The social emotional learning, all of those things in 1963 were not present. But guess what? Holism was clearly absent. Let me say that again. All those acronyms were not present, but holism was absent. I believe that dualism is desperately detrimental to the minds of the next generation because it breeds the sacred secular divide. I don't care if there's no comprehensive sex ed or any of that stuff, CRT, forget it. It was bad in 1965, it was bad in 1945, where schools where holism had been removed. So you want to find a school that's practicing holism where math, science, English, history, PE are all seen in the context of a biblical worldview.